So,
It's no Oz.
also, a note that I want to put up that I learned really recently, I just watched the 1940s Batman serial. And something really neat, just a little side note, Batman used to brand his victims in the 1940s serial. Now, it's not by burning it into his face, but they always had a bat sticker on their forehead when they're left for the police and like a little note, like Rorschach or something like that. And it's like, another present from the bat. And that was so neat to me because I'm not 100% sure if that actually influenced this movie.
No, I'm sure it did.
But I want to argue that it did.
There are so many references to the comics in this movie. As a comic book nerd, as we all are, more or less, like, I loved all the references in this movie. Like, all the way from Batman's straight-up Dark Knight Returns costume to the little thing where at the end Superman's casket is black with a silver S emblem, which is clearly reminiscent of the costume he came back in The Return of Superman when Doomsday originally killed him in The Death of Superman. So that was cool.
Didn't he have a mullet in that, though?
Yeah, it was the 80s. These things happen.
Just making sure.
So Zack Snyder, and here is another completely original Mike opinion that I didn't glean from anywhere by reading anything. Zack Snyder, when he makes movies, he makes like really cool moments that like, hey, wouldn't it look really cool if like Superman was doing this or if Leonidas was doing that? This would look really, really cool. Mm-hmm. And
does a great job translating that image.
Yes, he puts it perfectly on the screen. Yeah. But he just shows that.
Yep.
And like the beginning of Batman Superman is like, here's a bunch of really cool pictures. But, so I'm going to go back, way, way back. Mm-hmm. Everybody remembers The Matrix.
Okay.
And everybody remembers how cool it was.
Okay.
When Neo, in the hallway, the end of the movie.
In the hallway?
No.
Oh,
and he stops all the bullets.
Yeah.
Like, everybody remembers that. Like, no. And you can remember Neo holding his hand up and just all the bullets floating in the air. Yeah. And that's just fucking cool.
That's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. But it wasn't just, here's this, and it wasn't just him dodging bullets. It was all the story and visuals and everything that led up to that moment that then justified that moment.
Right.
So you didn't just have a random cool thing out of context.
The character was growing and changing.
Exactly.
And eventually doing something cool was part of it.
Exactly. Whereas Zack Snyder's like,
wouldn't it be cool?
Wouldn't it be cool if? And then he just forgets all the foreplay.
Like in Watchmen.
Like
when they brutally murder all those gang members in an alley. After seeming like they were supposed to be inept and washed up. And then they get accosted by some gang members, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, LOL, no, not really."
Which,
you can still beat the crap out of
he kind of just pulled that straight from the comic, though.
Well, I mean, the whole scene where
it wasn't as brutal in the comic.
No,
and also like it was about his impotence, and then they go and rescue some people.
Yeah.
See, that's the messed up thing is, and it's going to be difficult for me to go on this long rant, but I completely disagree. Take that example, that Watchmen example. That is a clearly defined narrative about Night Owl is trying to suppress the fact that he's eager to do what he did as a superhero. And so the choice to have it be extra violent when he has an outlet that he's been suppressing for so long, I think it is a little more showy than it needed to be. It's not as restrained as it needed to be, but it definitely feels like it was intentional, and it definitely gets the point across that it was trying to get across. It just doesn't resonate the right way. And that's what I feel like is the thing with Zack Snyder. There's a relationship between Zack Snyder trying to be overly apologetic to fans and trying to be too wonky and scared to make a movie that he wants to make.
I don't think it's that. I think like he sure is a fan and he's making the movie he wants to make. He just is like throwing a bunch of cool shit in there.
He wanted to make changes to Watchmen but refused to because of backlash to the fact that Watchmen was being turned into a movie. He wanted to make Sucker Punch, but he refused to write the dialogue for the girls because he didn't want to speak for the woman's voice. In Man of Steel, he had too much criticism for having slow motion, and so he avoided the use of slow motion across that entire movie and ended up getting backlash for the loud, noisy, convoluted ending of that movie.
Slow motion would not have saved that movie.
And I understand that, but here's the thing, is there's evidence from movie to movie to movie where there's been a backlash on his previous movie, and he's made deliberate changes to try to address those changes. And in Batman v Superman, the issue was that once Man of Steel didn't have a bunch of slow motion and didn't have some of the same criticisms that he got for Sucker Punch and 300, he decided to... The backlash was style over substance director, right? Which is essentially what you guys are talking about, is he has the idea for the image, doesn't really think about justifying those images. And in Batman v Superman, the argument, the criticism is that it was super convoluted. That they tried to put too much plot and too much justification behind everything. That it was overloaded with character motivations that were so much that they had to cut a 3-hour freaking movie down to being unable to follow.
That's what happens when you take like one of Superman's biggest storylines and one of Batman's biggest storylines and you throw them all in a movie together.
Yeah, that was the dumbest thing.
Yeah.
So 300, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Was 300 a good movie?
Yes.
Just yes or no?
Yes.
I feel like it.
Okay. It's an adaptation of a comic.
Frank Miller.
Yes.
That comic, if you pick up the hardback, the trade hardback of it,
which I've done,
it looks different than most comic books. It's sort of in the landscape view because the story in that comic kind of takes a back seat to the art and the visuals and seeing the spectacle of these 300 warriors fighting an entire army.
Intentionally. Frank Miller talks about taking artistic liberties with the real events in order to...
Right, and so when Zack Snyder makes that movie, it's a match made in heaven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that is exactly what he's good at.
Sure.
And while spectacle seems to be his forte, telling a detailed story does not seem to be his forte.
Okay.
So I think that's one of the reasons that this, and while the story is convoluted, I'm also going to call the story simple, not in the details, but how that story is told. Because it's, okay, we got one scene. Okay, let's go through it. Here's the details. Okay, next scene. Okay, we got the details. Let's do the next scene. It seemed to be like one scene after the other without much fluff.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know I'm saying on the one hand is all about spectacle, on the other hand there's not much fluff. But the thing is that that's not what he's good at.
But what was frustrating to me is like he had so many cool ideas in the movie and they were all just very glossed over.
But technically that's what should work for these big blockbuster movies, is easy to take in spectacle that gives you something to think about if you want to or entertains you. I mean, those are generally the kind of things that are said positively when one of these movies does well.
The problem is in this movie is there's so few and far between, and in between those like neat ideas, there's just a bunch of just. Why is this even in the movie?
Yeah. See, that's the thing is, I think Zack Snyder goes above and beyond trying to meet the criticisms and wants of his audience, and I think it's to a fault because he keeps pushing himself into territories where he doesn't have a lot of expertise. Because he's taking the bait from people who are trying to say that he should go do other things.
I'd rather he do that than do what Quentin Tarantino does.
Make good movies?
Which is cry and then shut down a project for a while.
We still got that project. I think he should be more like Quentin Tarantino.
That was real melodramatic, but at the end of the day, we got a really good Western, so who cares?
I don't know. It was a pretty good Western.
So here's the thing. The critical response to Batman v Superman was abysmal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that's fair?
Yeah.
For the movie?
It is. So if you look at Rotten Tomatoes scores, at least when the movie came out, it was lower than some garbage movies.
It still is.
And, okay.
Which isn't necessarily fair. But
that's right. I don't think that it's fair because the movie was at worst bad.
Yeah.
At best.
Okay.
It was hard.
Little less than mediocre.
It was alright.
I feel like, especially if you go on like the IMDb rankings of movies, that we're in an age of, how should I phrase this? Everybody has a voice. And that's not necessarily a good thing. If you look at the top 10 movies, you're going to see some movies that are okay.
Yeah.
In the top 10 of all time.
Yeah.
Because, one, it's movies that have come out in the internet age.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the people that care enough to go onto IMDb and vote for those movies. The online ratings and reviews tend to be sort of on a scale of bad and good. And the more it goes in that direction, as it starts to tip, more people will say that it's bad.
You're right. Just now, the three of us should have a voice.
To be fair, I'm sitting here saying this while you're watching a video on three nobodies.
But that's why we're doing what we are doing, is because part of what you're saying is something that I think is a problem for film criticism, is that people's instinctive initial impressions with whatever the hell else is going on in their lives end up marking the movie in the way it's perceived by other people and the way that it... You know, when people look back to tell if a movie is good, they're still going to all of these websites and they're still going to Google the reception of the movie. All this aside for now, what did you guys think of the audience reaction of being much higher for the movie and leveling it as somewhere in acceptable...
I think it's more fair for the movie because, like, it's not a terrible movie. It's not, like, completely claw your eyes out with a rusty spoon because that's the only thing you had available. But it's not good.
To quote Mike Stoklasa.
Who?
Mike Stoklasa.
From Red Letter Media.
Here's a picture of him.
Oh, that guy.
I'm going to put the picture.
To quote Mike Stoklasa, I'd rather see Batman, I'm paraphrasing, I'd rather see Batman versus Superman than blood in my urine.
Perfect. Yeah.
But the audience reaction is kind of odd to hear that it's that high when every person that I talked to one-on-one would tell you, oh, it's terrible. Don't go see it.
Yeah.
But I realize my sample group is pretty small compared to the broad internet at large.
I feel like we talked to...
But no, that's the thing, is the distinction that you made the last time when we were with Blade Runner is that all the information that we're going to compile for these reviews is all based on people who would comment online.
True, yeah.
So we are going to get specific character traits that don't necessarily attribute to everybody, but still...
Fair enough.
But it's all we've got.
Yeah.
So critical response,
it's
unfair.
The loud minority. Anyways, yeah.
Right, the loud minority.
Critical response, unfair.
Audience response, fair but deceptive, because
there you go.
More people in person that have told me it's terrible, but the people that care enough to go online and rate movies would say it was decent or it was okay.
Okay. Michael, closing thoughts?
Justice.
I think what he meant to say was, justice. This city just showed you.
And it's full of people ready to believe in good.
And I'm going to give it to them.
Oh my God.
All right.
I'm not wearing hockey pads.